Reeves Clippard is co-founder and CEO of A&R Solar, the highest rated and most prolific solar installation company in the Pacific Northwest. Aside from being an early mover in the space, starting in the mid 2000s, they are employee owned and have the greatest ride or die customer base you've ever seen that rave about them online. I dare you, go look online. 15 years in, they've blown all of their goals out of the water, and they've actually seen the industry change and ebb around them as they've grown. So, Ty, why should people be excited about this episode?
Yeah, I was insistent that we get Reeves on this show for exactly what you said, which is he has definitely seen this industry grow, change from the early days, from working on solar to building his own company today. He knows what the ins and outs of this industry is, what's going on, and what we probably need to do next. And he's built, like you said, these amazing customers by building an employee first company. So not only do his customers rave about him, but his employees rave about him. Super impressive individual, super impressive company. Definitely think you're going to learn a lot from this one.
He's really fun to listen to. He's got a lot of soul, pun intended. We'll dive deep into what's a solar coaster? Do we need to prop up the solar roof industry with government subsidies like we have the past 15 years? And then finally, is there that much appetite for buying solar panels? Find out today and join our conversation with Reeves Clippard on Climate Mayhem. Mayhem on!
Mayhem on.
Hey, Reeves. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I thought we'd start the conversation off with where you come from. What brought you here from? It was the Blue Ridge Mountains. That's in North Carolina. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. I actually grew up all over the South. Born in Virginia, South Carolina, Texas. Moved back to North Carolina in high school. Graduated from Appalachian State there, and spent a few more years before coming out west. My pat answer is usually telling people manifest destiny, and what that is for me is just kind of a shortcut of I was drawn westward. I lived in very rural environments in North Carolina, the suburbs in Texas. I'd never lived in a city. I was young, looking for kind of adventure. My family has a tendency to wander in our early adult life. We call it our walkabout. Go
Nice.
find ourselves and our place in the world. And so this was kind of the start of my walkabout was heading to Colorado to learn about solar, and then moved to Seattle and set roots down here. And yeah, it's a gorgeous place. I get to stay in the mountains, but now I get to have the ocean close by too.
So you grew up all over the South. How come you grew up all over the South?
We moved on average about every 2 years.
Okay.
We were not a military family. My mom grew up moving about every 9 months. And so I just say it was a little bit of a habit. There's always a reason around, housing or a job or something like that, but it's just what we did. And then when I moved out here, 3 months after I moved here, I met the woman who became my wife. And after we had been together for about 2 years, I said, all right, where are we going? She's like, no, I don't do that. So she's from the Northwest.
Nice.
She grew up in North Idaho. Her mom still lives in the house that she grew up in. And so I've set down those roots and tried
Nice.
to live, get that sink through by just traveling, not packing up
There
my
you
house
go.
and moving every 2 years. Yeah,
Right.
You could find adventure in different ways
exactly.
in entrepreneurship. It sounds like adventure was, you could say, a cultural value of your family. Like moving around is always an adventure, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough for young kids. My brothers did not have the same experiences I did at just being older. They we moved during natural transitions for them, middle school to high school, elementary school to middle school. I went to 2 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 4 high schools.
Wow.
And so, yeah. So in that, there's always this moment of, am I going to reinvent myself? I was always a very introverted kid. The moving was actually quite hard on me, but I always had that excitement of, hey, maybe I get to be someone else this next time. Maybe I'll find someone, find something new. Usually wasn't. I'm usually pretty true to myself, but there is always that kind of like, well, what's next? That still, is still quite common in my life these days.
Discovering new corners and crannies of yourself that you're like, okay, I want to dig into that in this new city, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, you end up with a very different perception of place when you travel, and
Hmm.
you're I think to myself, could I live here? You know,
Huh.
could I drive down? Could I
Interesting.
go around this corner 1,000 times and feel like this
Hmm.
is home? Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah, so
It's
it's fun.
interesting. Yeah, it is fun. It's interesting about a house, given what A&R Solar does. That like I had recently bought this house in Olympic Hills, and I was talking to my therapist, and he was like, "Oh, how are you making your place yours?" And I was like, "Well, how have you made your new office yours?" And he's like, "Well, I took a page out of your book, and you said, you know, it's a blank slate, and whatever you put into it is the character that you put into it." So really, you kind of bring yourself to a place, whether that's a home or a new city, and you kind of bring the energy, right? Maybe you felt kind of that way too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me to make my house my home is hanging up some of the family pictures, hanging up, having a few
Mm,
of the items
nice.
that we've always carried with us, and displaying them and putting them there, making that connection back to where I came from. But then creating new things as well,
Hmm.
um, for sure. And I think the Northwest is really unique that way. And I think the Seattle freeze that we get criticized for so often is actually just, we're such a young city, we're such a young
Hmm.
region that a lot of
Hmm.
people are, and we have so many people coming in that we don't have a common story yet,
Yeah,
right? Like,
that's a
I
great
grew up
point.
in
Mm.
places where families had been there for 200 years. Here,
Wow.
like, families don't have those same cultural norms of this is how you fit in, this is how you move in, these are the traditions, this is where you
Right.
step in to help a neighbor, or this is where you allow them to have their privacy. So a lot
Yeah,
of people just kind of struggle with what are our cultural norms. I'll just default to like waiting for someone else to take the lead, which is
Right.
often no one takes the lead.
yeah. Compared to a
I
city like
love that
Boston,
perspective.
that's a really
Yeah.
unique one. Yeah.
Yeah. I like it.
So an element in a house is bed, mattresses. Reeves, how are selling mattresses and A&R Solar related?
Okay, so you probably caught some of this from our history. When we first started, it was just Andy and myself, A and R, and we were really not getting paid. Luckily, our girlfriends and then our wives were um, willing to allow us to take the risk to start this company in the Pacific Northwest, and in Seattle of all places. And so we rarely got paid. We used to charge our customers to come out and evaluate their house for solar. Might be $200, might just be $50. And at the end of those site evaluations, Andy and I would just split the cash. And that was like his gas money to get home. That was like for me to, just scrape by. And one of our first employees, who is still with us today, Dave Cozen, when he came in, we're like, sure, we'll give you a job. But by the way, we can't pay you. We can't afford to pay you unless we have work. And so his side gig was selling mattresses out of a self-storage unit.
Wow.
So he had
Nice.
connections to the furniture industry, and he could get, discount mattresses and then would sell them on Craigslist. And so we would be in the middle of a job and he's like, guys, someone wants a mattress. What do you want me to do? We're like, go get paid. Right?
Yeah.
We want your free labor. Go do what you need to do to make rent, and then come back and join us as soon as you can.
I love it. Wow.
Uh,
Mattresses, they can be pretty high revenue, right? Maybe
yeah,
high profit margin.
my
I don't know.
understanding of the furniture industry is that there's a lot of markup there.
Okay.
Uh,
Wow. All right.
yeah,
Similar to from
Interesting.
what I heard, bikes like road and mountain and hybrid bikes,
Hmm.
like
no,
markups
interesting.
can be up to 50+%. I don't know,
Mhm.
maybe I'm wrong. Okay, very interesting. And there's no more selling mattresses going on anymore.
Not that I know of. No.
Okay, it's harder. It's harder with purple and those ones too. They're just
Yep.
so dang good. Reeves, what's the? I saw this word thrown around a couple times. What is the solar coaster?
That is what we call our industry because there are so many ups and downs. There are
Mm,
loops, there are blind turns. Sometimes you're hanging by your feet. It's just an industry where the brief history that I've been through in the solar coaster is we started in spring of 2007. In the fall of 2007, the construction industry started to crash. In the fall of 2008, the entire global economy
Wow.
crashed.
Yeah.
We've had incentive programs come and go, manufacturers come and go. Just this year, we had LG, a global manufacturer, decide to leave the solar market suddenly. That
Whoa.
had
Wow.
6 months of our pipeline. They were one of our highest selling modules. 6 months of our pipeline, we no longer have materials for. There were
Wow.
polysilicon shortages because smartphones came along, and they were similar production lines for conductor
Interesting.
grade silicon and solar modules. And then there was a glut of material for a while. And then Germany, because we have a global supply chain, Germany would change their policy, and all of the global supply chain would go to feed Germany's demand. And
Oh,
then we couldn't
geez.
get modules.
Wow.
And so there's always these things happening. And then what happens so much in program design, especially through like utilities and government, is there's often, despite best efforts, very little transparency. So there were times when we would have an incentive program that has a certain level of subscription and then it shuts off. But we didn't know when that subscription was going to get hit or not. So you're talking to
Wow.
customers and so like, I can't guarantee this, I can't promise this. You're talking to employees and saying, we're growing, this is going to be great. By the way, in 2 months, I don't know if we're going to be in business anymore. There's things like the most recently during the last administration, the Trump administration, the very first tariffs that were put in place were on solar panels and washing machines. But the way they
Wow.
were announced is the tariffs are coming, but it's like I think it was like a 5-month, 6-month process to decide what those tariffs were going to be.
Oh
But all the
God.
risk was on the manufacturers. So as they brought product on shore, and this actually happened with the most recent round of tariffs as well, is they might be hit with tariffs anywhere from 0 to 250% of the
Oh,
cost of the product.
what?
And that's
That could
manufacturer
change
risk.
everything.
Can change
Wow.
everything. So then suddenly manufacturers in this latest round before the Biden administration put I guess a moratorium on it, it might not be the right word. Um, Manufacturers were literally turning around ships on the ocean to go to different markets.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I mean, that's such a range. I mean,
it
how
is
do you,
such a
yeah,
range. Yeah. I've had
that
a
is
number of
crazy.
conversations with like other clean tech entrepreneurs and other
Mm,
businesses, and they're just like, your business is crazy. It is
wow.
always something. And it is, but that's, we laugh, not only do we have the solar coaster, but we have solar years, like 1 year in the solar industry is worth 3 in any other.
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it takes, yeah, you learn so much, have to go through so much.
Yep.
Yeah. Very, very interesting.
Cycles of the sun. Uh, what you know, besides warm weather, how has climate change affected your life so far? I guess really what we're trying to is when did you start thinking about these issues?
That's a great question. I mean, how it's directly affected me so far, I don't know that I have an answer for that because these are sometimes slow moving, sometimes fast moving, and it's hard
Hmm.
to connect the dots sometimes. But for me personally, like I have always been an environmentalist. In 7th grade, we helped our school and then our neighborhood start the first recycling program, which grew from there. And I was in environmental clubs and
Hmm.
um, mainly for like picking my career. How I ended up here is I went through school. I went through a 4-year degree program, graduated with a degree in business, computer information systems, concentration, and Spanish. And the couple of jobs that I had out of school were kind of pure capitalism jobs, um, selling prepaid phone minutes for people who maybe should have been spending their money on food rather than
Mm.
technology.
Wow.
Um, yeah, watching people make that choice of like, do I feed my child or do I buy a new cell phone? And then choosing the
Huh.
cell phone, like it was just kind of soul crushing.
Hmm.
And then moving into more of my IT business, where I worked for a fast food franchisee, helping them streamline their data systems. And
Hmm.
it's like, well, what is the success? What is my success measured by? More roast beef sandwiches getting sold, which is, as we all know, like the cattle industry is awful for the environment. So it's like,
Yeah.
why do I want to succeed at this? And then I worked for a mega corporate manufacturer in one of their distribution warehouses supporting their IT systems. And the culture there was one, again, I had no connection to the benefits of what we were doing, right? It was just kind of, you get
Mm,
paid, someone makes profit, and then stop questioning things. But
mm,
just the way that people were treated there. There was a woman that I ate lunch with, who had been there for 17 years and moved into kind of a lower level management position. And then there was this scenario that went down where ultimately she was let go, and no one ever said her name again. And it
Wow.
was like taboo to
wow.
say her name. And then just seeing their pay grades that were associated with it, it's just like, why am I doing this? And I had that an opportunity in that job. I had a lot of free time because I was in a reactionary support role. And I started reading about renewables, and a cousin told me about biodiesel. And I was just realizing that I wasn't the best employee. I had never really held a job down for more than about 6 months, I think, at that point. Um, but I was absolutely fascinated by renewables and thought, you know what, like what I do know that I'm good at is I'm good at learning. I'm good at working with other people. And so how can I think it was at that time I heard the statistic, true or not, but it's impacted me, that we spend more than half our waking lives at work. And
Mm,
if I'm going to do that, like I'm not someone who can work to play. Like my work needs to have a purpose. And that's
mm,
where that research was really driving me, is like, well, how do I combine these things that are
mhm.
going to make it possible for me to have a career and be happy with it? And it led me to renewables. And amazingly, like I mentioned earlier, I was just like introverted geek that just spent a lot of time in front of computers. So of course you should have a computer degree, and of course you should go into computers. And then I was like, you
Right.
know what? I think I want to go into construction. I want to build things.
Well,
And my family was like, what the hell is wrong with you? You've like never done anything like this in your life. But I went and got this education, and it gave me the opportunities to do some hands-on things, and gave me the confidence to say, no, I can do this. I can work in the trades, and
mhm.
there's a place for someone like me in the trades. And yeah, so I studied renewables, and eventually, started A&R Solar after working in the solar industry for another solar contractor here locally. So that's the kind of long story short of how environmentalism like drove me to where I'm at today.
You did do solar panel installation too, right? For a period of time for Puget Sound Solar.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Was that the
So
education?
no, so I got an internship at Solar Energy International in
Mm,
Colorado, and they're just a phenomenal nonprofit that does these like kind of 1 week, 2 week hands-on trainings around renewables. And so I did their internship. I went back to working in kitchens, just to support myself, and just learned a lot of the hands-on
mhm.
skills, the design skills, the things that I needed to know. That was an important turning point for me when I was working that last corporate job that allowed me to leave. Is I had this dream where very clearly, very lucidly in this dream, I was back washing dishes. I worked in kitchens for like 9 years through college and after, and those were all the jobs that I mostly had. And I thought to myself, like, I would rather be washing dishes than sitting at my desk at my corporate job.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was at that moment where it was like, you know what? I can wash dishes anywhere in the world. Like that gives
Yeah.
me an huge amount of freedom to explore any and every other career that's out there. And so when I went to Colorado, I was working, back to washing dishes, but I got to learn, just meet the most amazing people. And back in the solar industry, like you might actually know everybody in the industry. It was pretty
Wow.
small. And from there, while I was there, I was looking around at where I wanted to live, maybe DC, maybe Berkeley, maybe Seattle. And I started soliciting people and saying, hey, I'm doing this
Hmm.
education. Can I get a job with you? Like, well, we'll see, whatever. And Jeremy Smithson of Puget Sound Solar was one of the people that I kept bothering. And, my roommate from North Carolina had moved to Seattle. We had planned on coming out here together. And so ultimately, I did this massive road trip across the US after my education, landed here, and Jeremy reached out and offered me an opportunity. And
Nice.
in my interview with him, he's like, "Where do you want to be in 5 years?" Classic interview question. I said, "I want
Yep.
to be a competitor." And so yeah, uh, and it's actually where I met Andy, and
Oh,
was on the job site working for Jeremy, and we worked there for about a year, a little over a year, before we parted ways. still friends with Jeremy. They're still doing phenomenal work, but it was obvious that we weren't a good match for each other. But when we started A&R and left, we subcontracted them for some time, because what we didn't want to, we were his only crew, and we didn't want to leave them high and dry, right? Like one of the attitudes
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
put to A&R is, that we learned after that, or maybe we learned from Jeremy, is that we want to grow an industry, not just a company.
Nice.
There's a lot of benefit to us helping grow the marketplace than just saying, hey, this, we're going to be insular and we're just going to do our own thing and keep all of our secrets to ourselves.
Right. But I mean, it's interesting because everything you're talking about does just smell of a startup industry, not just a startup. But you kind of said some things in there like this startup, the solar coaster, has been going longer, I would argue, than a lot of other industries. Those turbulent times. These other ones seem to, like your friends have said, like they seem to be starting to work out some sort of smooth plateaus here and there. The solar industry, maybe not so much yet. So pretty wild ride. But you brought it up a couple times. So let's talk about the actual start of A&R. You guys meet each other.
Mm-hmm.
How talk us through, like, how did this get started? How did you actually make the decision and make the leap?
That's a great question. And I think both Andy and I probably have different stories. And I'll remember what I can. I kind of have this hindsight of being able to tell this story after the fact rather than
Sure.
as it's going. But yeah, before going to Solar Energy International, I had saved up some money from that corporate job, which is not much for rural North Carolina, but I took some time off and did a lot of soul searching. And part of that soul searching was around entrepreneurship. And so I thought, like, if I'm being an employee, maybe I could be a better employer. I at least have a lot of examples of what not to do. And so I think Andy and I just talking on job sites, working through frustrations and what can we do to help. And, I don't know that we engaged with our boss at the time, said, I know we communicated some frustration, but probably not as clearly as we could have. Maybe didn't take on the same responsibilities that we had to for ourselves at the time. But, we just continued to get help. My dad was an entrepreneur, kind of helped me think through what it would take to build a business, got some resources from like small business administration, some coaching, things like that.
Nice.
And I don't know when it was with my dad, but at some point he's like, you gotta shit or get off the pot. Like you gotta do something, right? Like you're talking about paralysis through analysis. He's like, you either need to do this or not. And at the time, let's see, we started 2007. So I guess Ashley and I were actually engaged at that point and had scheduled our wedding for later in 2007. And we kind of had this sweet spot where she was starting her career as a physical therapist. And she's like, like this is our time, right? We want to have kids in a few years. We got to get through this. And Andy and his wife were in a similar situation. He was engaged, about to get married, no kids yet. Like this is the time for us to be risky. And so that's what we did. We incorporated as a S corp from tax advice from a tax accountant. And early on too, and a lot of those conversations were kind of philosophical things about what employment is, right? Andy comes from being a union plumber pipe fitter background, and just from upstate New York, very different work experience than my own. And we were really intrigued by the idea of employee ownership and employees having the opportunity to benefit from their own work beyond just an exchange of paychecks. And there was a great book that came out at the time, and I know I still have it on one of my shelves, which is called The Companies We Keep, by a phenomenal company, South Mountain Company out of Martha's Vineyard, who I still know those people today. And that was a good model for thinking through how you might be able to engage with your employees in a different and more healthy and holistic way than just a kind of straight capitalist play.
Wow. It's interesting. I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs. I've talked to a lot of people. Heck, I talked to a lot of, managers who are just people managers. And it's always rare for find folks that start, think about their team or their employee first a lot of times. But I would say it's probably even exceedingly rare to find a startup thinking a bit about that model before the kind of the business model, if you will, is how do we do this better for employees. But I saw it all over your website. I saw it all over your videos and blogs, and it obviously is something super important to you. But on the other side of that, what was the let's say gap in the market, the solution when you go, we're going to do this? You had told Puget Sound Solar you want to be a competitor, but you also said I want to build this industry. So on the business side of things, what was the gap you guys were solving, or the place you were fitting into the industry?
I don't know that we really thought about it that much at the time. You're right. Yeah, part of our philosophy around thinking employees first, and you can see it on our website as one of our first principle, people first, was that if we could take care of the employee is in a better place to perform good work, which takes care of the customer, which
Nice.
then is a virtual cycle, because then the business is being taken care of. And so just from a personal need, we wanted to operate that way. From a business, we thought, hey, solar is going to be, it's not huge now, right? Like we were just starting to see, I I don't even know that there were, 10, grid tied PV systems in all of Washington at the time. Maybe there were, but there were just a handful of companies focused on this. And we said, there's room for us. And there's going to be a really bright future in distributed renewables. Like we can see that writing on the wall. And I think we just took kind of a classic approach of, there's like 5 competitors. Some people are focusing on this technology or that technology, but mainly everyone's just trying to find work. And we saw this opportunity where we didn't need to be the low cost provider, and we knew that and that to do a certain level of quality, we would need to charge more. And we didn't want to be the highest cost. And so, hey, can we figure out some way to kind of fit in the middle where we're just providing the best value we can, which includes a competitive price? And that's just really where we aimed for. And then what we started finding is that we really focused on quality. Quality of installation. Our early marketing was we wanted to market to general contractors. We thought that was going to be the place to.
Interesting.
Yeah, because they would recognize the quality of our work. And that was really driven by Andy, of just bringing his background into doing, just really high quality installations. Because often a homeowner's experience is, did you show up on time? And did you make a mess? But they're not going to understand maybe the level of craftsmanship that we bring to our installation. And so we wanted to go to general contractors, and because they would recognize what quality we were bringing. But then, as I mentioned, the construction industry crashed and a lot of our general contractors left the market. So, but we continue to think about that foundation, which is, any contractor can say their quality, but it's how are you defining that? And and we still kind of struggle with that. Like, how are we defining quality when our sales are saying we're the highest quality you're going to get? Well, what do you mean by that?
Right.
And a lot of it is customer experience. And are you delivering on the promise of solar? Like, we're telling you this system's going to be good for 30 years, maybe 50 years. Are we taking on the right practices across the company to deliver on that promise?
Wow.
Right.
Nice.
And so that comes back into that first principle, people first. And can we take care of the employees? Are they well trained? Are they well taken care of? Because we didn't want somebody up on the roof dealing with, at the time, it was solar hot water, not solar electric, not PV. But we didn't want somebody thinking like, can I pay rent? Like, can I get healthcare? Like, can I go to the doctor because I have an issue? And their mind's not on this potentially dangerous job in front of them of, working with open flames or pipes or electricity. And we wanted them to be able to focus on, hey, I'm taking care of at work so I can take care of you. Build a culture around that.
Nice.
Yeah. Ty, you have a great quality story, right? Because you actually work.
Oh yeah. Solar. So I'm a customer. I'm an A&R customer, and it definitely have a great quality. So a couple of them actually. I mean, you guys absolutely, I think, prioritize service. one of your guys, when they were installing the system, actually saw a kind of a rafter piece or something on my roof that was just a little bit, kind of soft and had been hit by the rain for a long time. It was on that side of the house, and he didn't like it, and so he just replaced it. He just fixed it before he finished the system. And he just said later, he's just like, just so you know, there was this piece of wood. It was rotted. It was going out. Like, it wasn't good. I just built a whole new corner over here for you, and that was just part of the service. Um, and then I want to say some point into the system, I've had the system for a few years now, and I got a call from one of your guys that was like, "So we're having an error on one of the systems that's on the side of your house, and I need to just replace this thing." And I was like, "Wait, what? Okay, what is that?" And he's like, "No, that's just what we do." And he just came out and replaced it in a handful of hours while I was working from home, and done, fixed, nothing, no charges. It was just fixed. It was part of the services. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So no, it's evident. And then Jacob, pointed out earlier when he was doing research on you guys, like some of the best Google reviews that you can see in the industry online, which is I mean, that's a feat, right? We know how online trolls love to hit everybody for anything these
Yeah.
days, man. If they can complain, they will. So your
Yeah,
your ratings are
absolutely.
second to none.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and what I love, if you go through and read some of the very poor reviews, it's often people who we said, no, solar's not good for you.
Oh,
And so
interesting.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, they're
yeah.
like, no, I absolutely want to go solar. And like, it really doesn't make sense. You're not getting enough sun. Your roof is too old. Like, we really recommend that you take energy efficiency measures or find a community
Interesting.
solar plant to participate in. And they don't typically like that. So, especially for some true believers. And for me, the mark of a good contractor, and it goes to the people that I hire to work on my own house, is it's not the lack of mistakes, it's owning up to the mistake and coming with a solution as soon as
Mm,
possible, right? Because the
interesting.
earlier you find a
Yeah,
mistake and start talking about it, the more solutions you have to. But if you wait until the last minute, the customer's like, hey, wait a second, you damaged that
right.
thing. Well, now you end up in these like where it looks like maybe a contractor is concealing something or trying to get away with
Uh-huh.
something. And what else is it that you've done that we can't see? And so much of our work is not visible to the customer. It's in a wall, it's
Sure.
under the panels, something like that. It really takes, I think, some being humble, some modesty to let somebody know, hey, I noticed this thing, I took care of it, and I just want you to know. Because you're right, like it could come and bite you in the rear online somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, there's a real fear in businesses for online reviews these days.
I know, right? Exactly. Like that's what they say. Like, give anybody the chance to say something, which the internet does, and everybody and people say something,
Yeah.
but they typically say 10 negative things to one positive. So,
Right.
hey,
Yeah.
yeah, no, your online reviews are pretty impressive. So,
Thanks.
um, well, and I love this. I mean, everything you guys speak is people first, and it obviously comes through, and it's helped you build, a 15 plus year business in this industry. But I have to admit, one of the reasons I was excited to have you on is because of your tenure in this industry,
Mhm.
and in this space of green businesses. I think, it's rare these days. There's a lot of startups. There's a lot of people tackling a lot of problems when it comes to climate change, but it's rare these days who to meet people like you who have been doing this for as long as you have, and in the retail part of the business, right? Which is you're there with the customers, both businesses and consumers. So I'd love to dig in a tiny bit at least about what you have seen. You talked about the solar coaster, but really over the past 15 years, what is, what have you seen happen? I think what the consumer sees is these government programs, the up, like, oh, we're going to get a tax rebate. Oh, we're not going to get a tax. Oh, we're this. And it's interesting the way it colors the consumer's perception of this industry. But as you've already alluded to, that's not everything that's happened in this industry. Broad question, but can you walk us through a little bit of the learnings of this industry, where what you're seeing, what you've seen, good and bad, that you want to call out in this space over the last 15 years?
Yeah, wow. That's a great question. I'll see if I can provide a valuable
Yeah.
answer. I mean, I think one thing I want to acknowledge as I start this answer is that, we do focus on people first. I want the listeners to know that we are far from perfect, and there have been a lot of missteps on our part in trying to figure out how to do this, and we continue to learn. And a lot of that, I think, is maybe to the point of your question of people change, expectations
Mm.
change, and
Hmm.
every business ultimately is beholden to what's happening in the market. And I think maybe some of the early customers that we had, I would call true believers, right? Like there was not a financial payback for going solar.
Hmm.
They were people who were willing to take a risk for what they felt was right. They wanted to do environmental good, and they were people of means, and could take on that financial risk of a new technology, new companies, new programs. And some of the things that have changed is just really the way that climate and energy has entered the kind of mainstream brain, I guess I will call it. And I think an example of that is like when I was at SEI in Colorado. When I left, I gave notice at my job, and when I had my going away party with all my friends, they're like, "What are you doing again? Solar energy? Like, what is solar?"
What is this thing?
And while I was there, this was 2005. That's when Time Magazine came out with their End of Oil cover. And
Wow.
so when I came back before moving out west, suddenly, I'm at the next party, but everyone had an opinion about what's going on with
Right.
End of Oil and what's going on with climate change and everything else.
Wow.
And we see some of the same thing with our customers where, some people want independence, some people just want to be
Mm.
green, some people are just looking for financial motivation, but it's often some combination of those three. But we have customers who are better informed, better
Hmm.
technically informed. I did a survey of our salespeople, kind of went on a road trip before COVID hit, about a year before, and was just like, how are things changing? Like, I'm not out sitting at the kitchen table anymore. Tell me about how customers are changing. And before, like, we used
Nice.
to, a lot of the growing the industry kind of activities were solar one-on-one classes at libraries and community centers, and,
Interesting.
energy nights, where it's like,
Yeah.
you put a solar panel in the sun, you tie it back into the grid, and you send it's just like some very basics. And now our customers are like, well, what panels are you using, and what is their source, and can you tell us about the
Interesting.
supply chain? What inverters are you using? Is it this technology or that technology? Just more financially savvy folks, people who, and me, like some early segments for us were baby boomers who were about to retire. And so we had a certain level of comfort with technology and discomfort with other kinds of technology.
Mm.
They wanted a certain kind of experience. And then our other customers were young, what do we call them in the Northwest? Like Henrys, high income, not rich yet. Um, and so, but it was people who were just starting their families and said,
Right.
like, when we have kids in the house, we want them to see the solar panels on the roof. We want them to see,
Oh, wow.
we want them to see the EV car in the driveway. Like, we want them to see us living a lifestyle that supports a sustainable earth. And so, but then as things have changed, like we have a broad range of customers now that again kind of fall into those categories of independence and making sure that they're spending their money wisely and doing something good for the environment. um, but now they're asking things about like, what are your business practices, right? You hear about this talked
Mm.
about with millennials,
Mm.
and Gen Z of, how are you treating your people? How are
Wow.
you treating your greater, it's my responsibility as a business owner not to just be in control of what's happening within my company, right? But like, um, what's kind of like the next tier out? Like, how am I dealing with my suppliers and my distributors, and who am I doing business
Interesting.
with?
Wow.
Who are they doing business with? And so there's stories that people want to hear, but we need to be able to back them up because we live in the internet age, and people are able to go out and look at
Look
reviews
it
and
up.
look at
Sure.
sources say, oh, you have this B Corp certification. What does that tell me? What that means and why that's important to me? And so now we are one of the highest priced providers in the market. And our story around that is like, this is what it takes to be able to deliver on, um,
Yeah.
what on the promise of solar, that it's not just about getting you clean energy. It's about our big business practices that allow you to get there, and the way that we treat our
Wow.
employees to make sure that, again, like that we have a sustainable workforce, and that they're being trained for the future, and that we're not, treating people or suppliers or distributors as disposable, right? Sustainability is really about that longevity of a system. And so just a lot of awareness around that, and what kind of things you support as a corporate entity, versus a personal entity. Yeah.
That's
So
that's super cool, and you guys were, in that sense, ahead of the curve to a huge degree with your people first philosophy and starting from that perspective. But I would argue it probably means you've got to, like you said, back it up, right? Like now you've had
yeah,
this story on the internet for 15 years of this is what we're about. Millennials these days will Google you, right? They
oh yeah,
will.
and they will challenge us. This is, where we have to continue to pivot and learn and change the way that we do things. Where how we got here or how we want to get to the next thing, we can't really do the same thing over again, right? Because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you have a purpose driven company, and you've attracted purpose driven employees, they expect you to do things like purposeful things. Like you can't just,
Mm,
right? Like when you have political upheaval, you don't get the luxury of ignoring that. You need to
right.
talk about what you're doing as a company and what you're doing as a people. And oftentimes it's a lot easier to do in a smaller company. And then as you get larger, well, you have people on either side of those politics.
Sure,
And
sure,
so how do you support the systems that support people to have those opinions and to do those things without
sure.
undercutting somebody else, and shifting culture. And um, over the last administration, there was a lot of focus put on businesses, where government oversight was kind of getting dismantled, right? Underfunded
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
purposefully dismantled. And so a lot of pressure was put back on businesses to say, well, how are businesses and corporations caretakers of, their employees and their stakeholders and everything else? And we're still seeing some of that today, of employees saying, I see this issue out in the world, call it racism, call it environmental destruction, justice and equity, like very big, difficult things that one company cannot solve. But there's
Right.
an expectation from purposeful employees to say, well, what are you doing to help? and
Interesting.
and you better
Yeah.
really do it.
Yeah.
You can't just change a Twitter color or a logo or whatever and say, look
Yeah.
look at our
Yeah.
support. Like, you got to back it up with real actions. And in the meantime, you're still trying to deliver a profitable product, because without the profit, the mission just doesn't work.
Doesn't work. Yeah, that's super interesting, and this is kind of where I was getting to, especially with your interest, your industry, talking about the solar coaster again. But you're talking about the evolution of your customer. Obviously, now the evolution to some degree of your employee, right? The one that you said
Mhm.
you put first, people first, the customer and the employee. But this other part of it, which is the reaction to the government, and I just have to ask, a more pointed part of this thing is the history of the government involvement or lack thereof over the last 15 years has got to be just such a wild ride on this coaster because I mean, as I think most people are introduced to solar, it's with some sort of tax credit or
Mhm.
government program or pulling a program and pulling a tax credit or changing their mind. Or, like you mentioned earlier, tariffs on certain parts of the supply chain, et cetera. What is that ride like? How has that ride have been of having the government in your business, out of your business over the last 15 years, and where are we today? I guess right now, like where is things gotten to? But I'd love to know a little of the history and your way you guys rode that ride a little bit.
Yeah, um that's again a great question. And I think it boils down to power is politics. Like, if you look
Mm,
at the state of the world 15 years ago, you see most of the corporations dictating policy are oil, coal, traditional energy
Wow. Yeah.
businesses. And I was really naive at one point, right? Like we were looking for a new incentive or new funding for an incentive here in Washington. And we started to get involved with lobbying efforts and things like that, or just going down and, meeting your representative face to face. And just
Mm-hmm.
personally for me, it's like you're meeting with someone who doesn't smile with their eyes. And they're really good at saying, of course, constituent, this really matters to me, but then not actually taking action. And for some reason, I thought like, hey, if we just get this program passed, we'll never have to play politics again. And I think it was after the failure of that I realized, no, like power is politics. And one of the things that
Wow.
the industry is doing is disrupting traditional power structures and literally giving power to the people. Like solar is the only technology that we consider like let's see if I'm getting the phrasing right, like a democratic energy source, because anyone can use it anywhere,
Right.
within
Right.
reason, but it's not something
Democratizing
that
energy, right? Like,
democratizing energy. Thank you.
Distributed systems. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
distributed. So you're literally taking central
Wow.
power control out of traditional hands and distributing it to the people. And those traditional power structures don't like that. Society isn't really
Sure.
set up that way. And those investor types, and not just investors, but like other public institutions, they're used to thinking about tax credits and maximizing those things. They've enjoyed subsidies for generations. And
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, it's now you have to educate people about how their money works and how their taxes work and what's a credit
Wow.
versus a deduction. And so you're introducing a level of complexity to people that just isn't there before, right? Like many of our
Yeah.
customers, before ever hearing about solar, their interaction with energy and electricity was I turn on the switch, my lights turn on, I turn off the switch, I do that, I get a
Right.
bill. And so we like, well, this is how many kilowatt hours your system's going to produce. So like, I don't know what that is. Like, what's a kilowatt?
Right.
What's a kilowatt hour? What's an electron? What do you mean it flows? Does it really flow? And then, it's like, how many doors do I open here? And you get into
Yeah.
arguments with engineers are like, tell me about the voltage drop across a bypass diode here. And then other people are like, can I paint my panels to match my house? Like, is that a thing I'm allowed to do? This is, um,
Wow. All over the
that moves a
place.
little away from the politics, but it's also you have this tremendous groundswell, right? Like so many of
Yeah.
our
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
customers were so tired of hearing politicians say we need to do something but not doing anything, and adopting solar was it's a chance for people to participate in the future that they want to build. And so that's like really powerful to be
Interesting.
around people who
Yeah.
are making that choice, investing savings and money into doing that. And then oftentimes those people continue to get involved in the politics afterwards. Solar now employs more people than the fossil fuel industry. There's
Wow.
again, you can do this in every single state, right? So every single governor, senator, representative has some solar company, some distributed energy company working in their district, and benefiting from solar. And the great thing about this, right, democratizing energy, is these are jobs you can't outsource, right? Like we
Hmm.
saw that happen in the late 90s, and I was young and kind of not paying attention there, but I do remember hearing like, what are these service industries? Like we're a knowledge-based economy. And you just saw a bunch of things
Mm-hmm.
offshore, and offshoring was the big word. And now you hear about onshoring this and that. Like you can't take one of our electricians and ship them to some other country and still get solar on your house. Like we are boots on the
Right.
roof. And it's like, and
Yep.
those benefits just continue to accrue within the communities that we work in. And so, politically, you just see a lot of engagement at the community level and just, at the state and regional level and federal level. And politics will never leave energy, but they're changing. And, where, so that's maybe a little bit of the brief history. And I think what you see now is more broad support, right? The government is always going to be behind what the people really want. And we could get into the politics of, does or representative democracy, is it really effective at giving the people what they want? But people are moving this forward, and politicians are just slower to get on board and move forward. But I mean, we just see this confluence of amazing things happening. And is it too little too late in a climate change perspective? We don't know. But there's this great saying that I will paraphrase here, which is like the best day to, like, if you need shade, the best day to have planted a tree was 20 years ago.
Right.
The second best day is today. So
right. I love it.
yeah. So I just, whether the political effort is too little too late, it doesn't matter, because it needs to happen no matter what.
It's happening. Right.
It's happening. Yeah. And so now we have, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is like the most stability that we've ever seen on the federal level.
Oh yeah.
It was just phenomenal. We're still trying to discover what that means, and we'll be discovering that for the next 10 years. But then in Washington State alone, you see the passage of, the 100% clean energy by 2050 or 2045. Oregon has passed similar legislation. I believe California has as well. So you have an entire, the West Coast all trying to achieve this net zero future. And more states are adopting that. So there's just this momentum that is like, hey, this is happening. We're going to do it. The question is, how are we getting there? Which comes back to growing an industry, trying to make sure that there's not room for bad actors. But you're also seeing some of these traditional power structures, political and otherwise, come to accept that, hey, we can't fight solar, right? There are a lot of early efforts to kill distributed solar. Now they're like, actually, how do we take advantage of this? How do we have programs for our utility customers? How do we get our community solar projects installed? There's still challenges there, right? Like Washington State has so many, like 64 different utilities, and many of them are rural co-ops who get their hydropower from BPA, and 80% of their customers are low income, and they don't have the resources to learn a new technology, learn how to interconnect it, learn how to manage it. So there are challenges there, but then the Inflation Reduction Act actually provides support for entities like that to pursue more distributed renewables and clean energy and hydrogen and research and all kinds of stuff. So it's like we're entering this time where there is a lot of support, and there is a lot of will, and just a lot of excitement around it, and good and bad things will come of that, but mostly good.
I love this quote: power is politics. It's the flip side of whatever politics is power, those kind of things. It took me a second to understand the definition of that, but I get it. Like when you say that, it's not something I've ever heard nor thought, but wow, that's a really interesting observation, and I dig that a lot. And I'm going to cheat a little bit here because, I think I've asked you this question in a personal setting in the past, but what you just said at the end there kind of brought me back, almost, I would argue, changing an answer I had in my own head. But is this idea of like, I'm asking it differently than I think I would have asked it in the past, but do we need government programs to buy solar? Like, there's a part of me that is, and I think the way I said it to you before was, it drives me crazy that your sales guys have to sell on ROI and the fact that you're going to get this payback and all of this. And we don't buy a car expecting an ROI. We don't buy a refrigerator expecting an ROI. If you believe in solar and you want to go into this, why do we need a tax credit in order to buy it and make it kind of quote unquote affordable or have some sort of ROI? But what you just said there at the end about these potentially rural, utilities and areas and people who need education, all of a sudden you started to change my perspective a little bit there. But I'll say it just plainly: do we need government programs to help us buy solar?
That is such a good question, and I'm with you. I would love to not have to talk about payback, and I don't know how that ever got into the question with solar, because you're right. Granite countertops don't have a payback. You don't usually question the source of where those came from, right? Solar is kind of held to this higher standard, and in a way, I think that's really good because it prevents more bad actors, and it encourages, maybe some better behavior out there sometimes. I would love to operate in a business that did not function on subsidies, but I don't I don't know that there is a business out there that doesn't enjoy some level of subsidies, whether they're employee retention tax credits or tax credits for this or that or the other, right? Those are
Yeah.
the rules of the game that are laid out for us to play. And it's up to us to figure out how to play that without breaking the rules, and how to thrive within that. And so I think in some ways, would it be great to not have to worry about incentives? Yes. And the structure, the rules just aren't really set up for us to play that way yet.
Mm.
We
Yeah, that
there's a
makes sense. I see
really
what you're saying. Yeah.
like there's a really old kind of way of thinking in the solar industry where it's like, damn the man, like the utility's the man and down with the utility.
Right.
And we took an early approach to say that's not really right. The utilities are our partners, right? Because without the
Right.
utility, we don't get to interconnect our systems. Our customers are
Interesting.
their customers. It's just that the utilities were not meeting the needs of our customers, and we are able to fill that need. Right? The customers wanted to have some power production in their own hand. They wanted some
Mhm.
level of control. They wanted to tackle climate change directly, and the utilities weren't providing that need. They are with other programs and green programs, but those don't quite touch on the independence. They don't touch
Mm.
on self-control and self-determination, which is really big in the Northwest. I love this like
Yeah.
painter spirit that still exists out here,
Yeah.
of like, we are fiercely going to be independent and we're willing to do it together. Like it's
Right.
this great balance of this like collaborative independence.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's what government is good for, is saying like, people are not rational actors, businesses are not rational actors, and government does need to step in there in some way and guide and direct what's happening there. And so I think these programs that are out there help do that. They help make sure that the energy is going into the right places. Within the Inflation Reduction Act, we're going to see so many more community solar projects that are in places serving people that are going to be at the most risk for future climate change, right? So you have rural communities, poorer communities, low income, moderate income communities, tribal communities. A lot of programs are going in to make sure that, it's like when you focus on making sure that how do you say this? It's like if we can focus on making sure that the people who most need it get it, everyone else will get it too, right? Like we need to be thinking about them first. This came up a lot in the Washington State energy strategy of, we need to do all these energy things. And then there was always, when we were going through the strategy for Washington State, the last cycle, we had Black Lives Matters were something on everyone's mind. And so we had this diversity and equity and justice piece, but it was always at the last bullet point. We're going to do all these things, and also we'll talk about this. I was like, no. Like, you have to do it first. Like, you have to think about these things first. And capitalism isn't good at doing that. So that's where some level of government intervention, I think, is good. Even if it's just saying, this is the signal, this is the benefit for you working with these communities, making sure that your business benefits these communities, whether it's through participation or ownership or workforce. That's not going to happen without some kind of level of government programming, whether that's an incentive program, a tax credit, or something like that.
Yeah, fair.
Fascinating.
I like it.
You've mentioned the climate bill a couple times, the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. How is this going to help A&R Solar, if it is?
It's definitely going to help.
Okay.
I don't know. Yeah.
It was a big document.
It's a big document. I had a training this morning, just going through just a very small section of it.
Wow.
It's interesting, right? It's stability, right? We've talked about the solar coaster a couple of different ways, and I don't expect it to bring broad economic stability. Right? There's still going to be macroeconomic things that A&R Solar and other solar companies have to navigate. There's still going to be societal things that we have to navigate. But the ability for us, so if you think in the past, like with one of these programs, it expires in 6 months. Okay, well, how are we making investments as a business? How are we directing our investments? Well, we can buy a truck, but it needs to pay for itself in 6 months or less, right?
Yeah.
So I just sat through a presentation about converting our fleet to electric vehicles. Well, that's from a pure investment standpoint, that's a 4-year payoff. Well, until this passed, I wasn't sure if I'd be in business in 2 years.
Hmm.
I mean, still not
Mm.
sure, but I have a pretty good track record. So I'm reasonably confident that we're going to be in business over the next few years. But now I can start to think about, and not just me, but our entire leadership team and the entire company can start to think about what are the investments we're willing to make that are going to have much longer term payoffs, whether that's investment in training or
Yeah.
equipment or
Mm.
software or something else to make ourselves, just more efficient, better, reduce frustration, increase
Because you
health and
can let
safety.
yourself think about that now.
You can let yourself think about that now. So there's like a lot of traditional business financing and just regular like business best practices that we haven't been able to practice in almost 16 years
Hmm.
because
Wow.
there's always that unknown cliff, that wall that we can't see beyond. And now we
Yeah.
get to start looking at long-term planning and go, yeah, I think that's reasonable that we can achieve that in 3 years.
Wow.
Well, that's fascinating, and that's awesome. You get some run room, which it seems like it's gonna, with the amount of funding, be a few years, right? Ty and I were talking about a subject before we hopped on the call, which is labor. Like, you need great electricians, and maybe you need roofers or not, a special type of a roofer. Do you see labor being an issue given everything this climate bill is enabling? It really does require a strong labor force. You could say more blue collar, right?
Absolutely, 100, 1000%. Even before this passed, just Washington and Oregon passing their clean energy bills, their goals to be 100% clean energy. And again, participating in the state energy strategy process, we looked at a bunch of different scenarios. How do you get there through, say, cleaning up natural gas, doing renewable natural gas, this, that, or the other? And what it looks like, at least our region will be pursuing, is a electrification of the economy, right? Electrified
Right,
transportation,
right.
Yeah.
homes, all these
Yeah.
things. Well, to do that, you're absolutely right. You need the skilled labor to do that, which for us is electricians and apprentices, and they've already been in short supply for really a long time. Like some of our first hires that we made to get electricians on staff, that was like our hardest hires to get people and to keep them. And
Wow.
we've done better, but the effort is going to be tremendous to move our society to adopt these technologies as quickly as we need to and as
Mm,
quickly as we can with labor. And as we were saying before you hit the record button, we were talking a lot about public schools and education
Mm-hmm.
and pathways, and what are the resources being given to the kids these days. And as a society, we have waged this multi-decadal, I don't want to call it a war, but we've just eroded the
Mm.
trades as a pathway to to achieve the American dream, which is just
mm,
Right.
absolutely fascinating to me. And I do this in my own life. I mentioned I've got a 4-year degree. We're with my own kids, where like
Mm-hmm.
it is not a question of if you're going to college, it is where. And 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 I say this as somebody who is often on the soapbox saying that we need to be talking to kids about the trades as early as middle school and high school.
Yep. Yep.
It's not necessarily about making sure that there's a shop class anymore. That would be great, but like me as a computer geek, being able to learn this on the job, like anyone can learn it on the job. um, but what we need to know is like, we talk about all this like college debt that's going on. By the way,
Mm-hmm.
there's this great
Right.
4-year program over here with on-the-job training where you take on no
Right.
debt and you get paid. Right now, the prevailing wage job, if you're working on public bid or you're working for a union contractor, for an inside electrician in King County, $96 an hour. There is
Wow.
no 4-year degree that you can get that guarantees you that kind of pay as soon as
Right.
for
you get
which
your
job?
degree. As an inside electrician, right? Like maybe I should go back to the apprenticeship.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And it's not just even saying, hey kids, don't forget that the trades are a good place to go. And hey parents, like
Right.
if you've got a head on your shoulders, you can go so far in the trades. So far, there are so many opportunities, and it's not just about turning the screws. Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that takes a lot of skill and a lot of knowledge and a lot of training. But then you're also learning a bunch about how different systems interact.
Mm-hmm.
You can move into
Mm-hmm.
sales, production, warehousing, logistics, project management, estimate, like any other
Wow.
corporate job that you really wanted outside of programming and development. Like you're learning the management skills within the trade. So we have a high number of people with 4-year degrees who are now in the field.
Wow.
Many like me who said, I got this degree, I thought it was going to get me where I want, but I need purposeful work, which might include like building physical things, and said, you know what, I'm going to go to solar where I can do that. I can actually, at the end of the day, I can see that I did something good for the future. And so, yeah, labor is huge. It's going to continue to be just a struggle, I think, for a lot of people, which comes back to, you know, I think, as we said, like people first and learning how do we continue to do that and meet the needs of the workforce where they're at. So, you know, as probably talk to businesses about like the great resignation, and I don't consider the great resignation because people are still looking for work. I consider the great shakeup of like, I can't do this job anymore. I want to do something else. And we want to be that place where the grass is greener on the other side, right? Like that's our goal.
Love it.
We've got a lot of work to do there.
Yeah. Did the sorry, I haven't read the big document that is the IRA. Did it talk about that? Does it have some support for programs to get people to get training?
Yeah, there for solar specifically, and I don't know if I'm sure there's probably some Department of Labor funding that helps people kind of get into programs and get programs going, expand programs. For us, there is the tax credit for large systems. There is an adder if you're using registered apprentices and have an apprenticeship program in place, and if you're prevailing wages, you can qualify for a higher tax credit. And so our initial math right now is looking like, you know, that additional incentive just pays for the additional labor, but isn't that great? Like, you're talking about people making really nice wages working on phenomenal projects, and the government is helping pay that through these tax credits, and again, just supporting the communities that we're working in.
Nice. Well, I've got one big question for you that we kind of been asking everybody in this space, and it's this kind of, you know, it's the look forward of you know, all things, all industries that are trying to impact climate change. In your mind, and from what you've seen in your experience, you know, what do you think is the next big step change, or what can be part of the next big step change in climate action or sustainability down the road?
Yeah, phenomenal question. This is my chance to say, you know, a lot of times over the years, one of the things that our hesitant customers said that prevented them from going solar is, well, what if I'm going to wait for the next best technology? I'm going to wait for the next thing. And yeah, and what we've been able to say, and now I've got 16 years of experience saying, is like, don't wait for the next best thing. Like, improvements in our industry are incremental. So if you wait 5 years, you know, that incentive might not be there. The programs might not be there to support you. And so the best day to go solar is today, and start benefiting the environment. And in a much broader view is, I think that's true of a lot of different technologies. You know, the time to adopt them is now. It's not to wait. Don't wait for an electric car. You know, and that's where I think the next big step change will happen is people moving out of their ICE engine, you know, internal combustion engines, and getting into electric vehicles, and that immediately changes your relationship with energy and home energy. We saw that happen through the pandemic with people who were working from home, and suddenly like, oh, realizing how many lights I have on and what that does to my bill. And, you know, when you're driving an electric car, it does the same thing, and you suddenly say, well, where is my energy coming from, right? If you live in the Midwest and you're driving an electric car, and you learn like, oh, well, it's coal-fired electricity, so am I really benefiting? Well, actually, yes, because you're helping build the industries that support deploying electric vehicles, and you're creating a demand for clean energy to power your car. And so, yes, it's an absolute benefit. And I think, you know, I see here in the notes, like vehicle to grid, that will absolutely be huge. I think we'll enter into a new kind of relationship with our utilities, where our customers are already doing this as power producers, or what was the term coined for a while, like prosumers, producer consumers.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we'll have to have this relationship. Like, what are the contracts and the expectations that you have from your utility when you have a mobile battery that parks in your driveway?
Nice.
Who has control of when you get to use that car or not? How do I, as an individual, say I'm okay losing some distance if what I'm doing is benefiting the rest of my community. And so you'll have
Yeah.
different communities around the US and around the world saying, I'm all for supporting the community. That's how we're going to get there. And other people take very individualistic standpoints and say, no, there will be no control. I need something else. And just within the utilities, do we have an organic, system that kind of signals itself and brings resources when it needs, or is it all about engineered control and being a conductor of this orchestra versus a living system? So I think there's just a lot of really fascinating overlaps between I think electric vehicles, renewable generation, distributed generation, the IT infrastructure that is going to make all these things happen, and to a point where utilities can count on all of these technologies to be there when needed. And then just honestly, like even the legal structure of what are our responsibilities? Like what is the agreement between you and me and the utility and the government and other people to adopt these and make sure that the greatest benefit happens for the greatest number of people?
Super interesting perspective. I really like the expansion on the social contract there that you kind of alluded to. Like, love it, because you're right. I mean, it's funny, we have these unspoken social contracts, but some of these unspoken contracts have now become, I hit the light switch and my lights turn on, and you realize that is not actually, that is a paid relationship that we've just now taken for granted. But we might need to change that and have this true kind of other perspective on that social contract. I dig it. All right, Jacob, I think it's time.
All right, we're entering the valley of rapid mayhem questions. Reeves, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, no cheating. All right, these are going to be all true or false. So first off, the sun is so massive that it accounts for 85% of the total mass of the entire solar system. So we're zooming out to space right here first before we get closer to renewables and solar. I'm
going to have to say false. I think it's more.
That's right. That's true. It's actually 99.86%.
Wow. I didn't think it was that much. That is
huge.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's crazy. All right. Now, let's go to question number 2. True or false? In 30 years, the average rooftop solar panel system can reduce pollution by about 100 tons of CO2. True or false?
Oh man, depends. Classic solar.
The average. Sorry,
depends on where you're at.
The average.
Yeah. Oh, this is going to be a wild guess for me. I'm going to say true.
That is true. Yeah. All right. 2 for 2. You're the first guest. I really do try to trump him a little bit, but
a little bit. I know.
It's fun to surprise people a little bit with this stuff.
Fair.
I might have said too much. Number 3, true or false? The power of the Earth, the power of the whole Earth with solar energy, it would require 500,000 square miles of solar panels.
I think I used to have a slide for this in one of my Solar 101 decks. I think I want to say it's true, but I'm going to go false. I got to.
Gosh, you're good. Yeah, it's false. It's actually a lot less for the audience too. It's actually 191,000.
Oh wow,
square miles.
It's not much.
So 2.5 times less than 500,000. So it sounds pretty realistic.
We're just getting more efficient after.
Yeah. All right. Number 4, true or false? In 2019, Zillow did a study, and it showed on average, homes with solar panels sell for 6% more than homes without.
I should know this number. I think it's actually on our proposals. I think it's 4%, but I might be getting my numbers mixed up.
You're right. It's 4%.
Oh, it is.
Oh, wow, look at that.
I take back what I said, and it's false.
It's false. It's false.
4%.
Wonderful. All right, last one. The cost of creating a PV has gone down from $1,900 per watt to 65 cents per watt. That's as of 2017.
So 2017. That might be true. I think it's even cheaper now.
I think it's cheaper now.
20s or 20 cents a watt or less for solar panel for some to be produced.
Yeah, true. Man, 5 out of 5.
Wow.
Dang.
There we go. There we go.
Done.
You know your stuff. You know your stuff. All right. Last question, Reeves. Climate change is so big. People often feel helpless in helping. We've kind of really sprinkled this throughout the entire conversation. What do you think is the equivalent of what a listener can do? Let's say like any busy soccer mom could do.
Do anything. do anything. Not, I think this is something that people don't understand. Not doing anything is still a choice. So if you can do anything, this comes back to my middle school environmental club, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? As starting right away. And you got to realize, like, there are corporations who have such a bigger impact than you, but it doesn't matter. I think we all have a personal responsibility. So if it's walking to the grocery store instead of driving, work it into your schedule how you can do it.
Nice.
I think,
yeah,
it's just, I think it's just anything you can do. Like, if you're able to reduce consumption of some things by 50%, that's 50%. Right? We offer that with solar. Like, if there's a great solar program, go solar, but you don't need to. Maybe just get a more efficient car, get an EV, buy into your utilities green power program. Those funds go to help other people get solar. Even if solar doesn't take you 100% solar powered, 10%, like, that's you're moving in the right direction.
Incrementally good. Yeah,
it's incrementally good, and we need as much of that as possible.
We really do. I think a great example is just trying plant-based meat, right? Like, it's amazing what I've seen in the past 5 years. The price of ground beef gone up because I feel like there's this supply and demand battle that's starting to happen of people who used to eat red ground beef. Now they're eating Impossible or they're eating Beyond, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime I've eaten vegetarian, it's always like, I don't want my veggies to pretend they're meat. I just don't like meat substitute products. But then Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat came along, and holy cow, like, that is my preference when I go out. Like, I have rules around, like, I just don't really eat red meat, but I love being able to get a good burger and having that option out there. Yeah, it's huge. Absolutely huge.
They just got to unlock steak now. Like a Philly cheesesteak sandwich, Beyond Meat stuff would be prime. All right, Reeves, any other call section before we go? This has been amazing.
No, I don't.
Any discount codes for A&R Solar?
No, we have a great referral program.
All right,
so you can certainly mention this podcast. I'll let our folks know, and we'll send some referral money around.
Okay.
And real quick, where can we find A&R Solar?
A-rsolar.com. A-rsolar.com. That's where you find us on the web. We're on Instagram, Facebook. We're on the socials, LinkedIn as well. And in a neighborhood.
And what's all the states you guys do solar in right now?
Yeah, so we do residential, commercial in both Washington and Oregon, border to border in both states, headquartered in Seattle with an office in Portland. But we do work everywhere. So a lot of residential. Commercial also does a lot of municipal and tribal work. So yeah, if you're interested, we're happy to help.
Okay.
I highly recommend it. Well, Reeves, thank you so much, man. This was a pleasure. Like I said, I was really excited to have you on just because of appreciate the work you've done in this space for so long. And yeah, it's great to have you.
Thanks, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. A lot of fun, and thank you for letting me get some of the good word out.
Yeah, that was incredible. Thanks so much, man. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right,
have a good day.
All right, see you.
Bye,
Reeves.
Boom. How was that? Well, there's more. So keep listening. We speak with climate tech leaders and change makers in EV, reforestation, solar energy, flood mapping, and a whole lot more. Also, you can give feedback or check out show notes at our website, climatemayhem.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Oh, don't forget, if you found this valuable or interesting at all, please hit subscribe. That way we know you're loving it. So just go to Spotify or whatever podcast app you're on, hit that subscribe button at the top. Production was done by Daniel Steenkamp with cover art by Harrison Glenn. This is Jake Kubica with my legendary colleague, Ty Wolf motherfucking Jones. Peace out, Climate Mayhem. Out.